Nothing ever changes, man. 50 years from now, we're all gonna be dead, and there'll be new people standing here, drinking beer, eating pizza, bitching and moaning about the price of Oreos, and they won't even know we were ever here. And then 50 years after that, those suckers will be dust and bones, and there'll be all these generations of suckers.
Finally, we have a film from somebody who's directed one of the best teen films ever made, and that is Dazed and Confused. This is Suburbia, directed by Richard Linklater. It has a Letterboxd score of 3.3 out of 5, an IMDb of 6.7 out of 10, a Rotten Tomatoes of 68% fresh, and Metacritic of 63. And there are no accolades to speak of as of this time. When I finished this film, I had one thought in my mind. And when I had this thought, I was like, oh my God, this would be great for the review. And then what I do is I write my review, and before I record, I get 4 reviews from Letterboxd. And of course, there's one Letterboxd review that succinctly makes the point I'm about to make. So instead of just taking that point and making it my own, I'm going to give credit to somebody else who did this. And this is the Letterboxd review from Corley Johnson. Corley Johnson gives it 2 stars out of 5. And I'm only going to read the first paragraph because it's a long review, but I think he makes the point that I was trying to make. So, Corley Johnson says, in some ways you can feel the cinematic full circle moment. Kevin Smith has said that if it weren't for Slacker, he may not have made Clerks, and in many ways Suburbia feels like what if Richard Linklater made a Kevin Smith movie. Suburbia offers a more cynical look at a life for young adults. Instead of being filled with philosophy from various perspectives, which is common from Linklater's films, this one takes a nihilistic approach to the worldview shared by all the characters. And yeah, Corley is absolutely right. This film feels like a Kevin Smith film, essentially. Not even just with the setting. It definitely is in that point. But by also showing the angst of the characters and how unsatisfied they are. And what's funny is that there are some things that Linklater can do that Kevin Smith just can't do as good as Linklater. It's better shot. There's better actors. It's better directed. But Suburbia does one thing wrong that is crucial, that Clerks does very right, and that is have a concise execution of the narrative. And that's my biggest problem with Suburbia, because Clerks is many things, but Clerks definitely is focused, which is something that this film is desperately lacking. So this is like a 2-hour film, and honestly, this film needed to be desperately cut of a lot of things. It needed to cut themes, it needed to cut runtime, it needed to cut characters. There are just so many things in this film that just felt unnecessary. I'll give one prime example. There's the character of BB. BB is a very quiet character. She shows up at about 10 minutes in the film. She barely talks, barely does anything. And then you find out something about her maybe an hour or so in that finally gives her some character development. Then she disappears, and then she comes back at the end. And then what happens at the end is something that is supposed to have some kind of deeper meaning to it, which the film just does not provide. There's other things as well. There's the whole thing with Tim and Erica that just doesn't work. There's even the subplot with Buff that happens in the film that just feels very throwaway. So to me, if the film started with Pony coming up and seeing everybody in the corner like the old days, and then ended when Pony left, and then just made the plot line centered around all of that, and have the characters be a lot more interesting, a lot less boring, I think the film would have worked a lot better than what it did right now. There's a definite identity crisis that this film has. Hell, the thing that happened at the end with Tim and Erica, with what Tim supposedly did, and how that ended, felt cheap. I just did not like how that thread ended at all. This film is full of threads they want to try and tie into a nice bow, but it just does not work. And the ending, as well, is completely ineffective. Which is kind of a shame, because there's 2 things that the film does right. I think the performances by the cast is actually pretty good. And the feeling of suburban youths finding stuff to do at night and really finding almost nothing to do is actually well captured in this film. But the problem is it's in a 2-hour film that just meanders for way too long. And they just made the film a little more concise and scripted a lot more tightly. It would have been better off, but it would have been more of a 3 out of 5 for me than anything else. So even then, it wouldn't be as interesting. This is a film that has an identity crisis, and I think if you're a Richard Linklater film, I think you should check it out anyway. But if you're not, I would say just avoid it altogether. Now, in every episode of Watch, Rate, Heart, I not only give you my opinions of the films I'm watching, I also give you the opinions of the Letterboxd community. And on this second review is from Cinema Void. Cinema Void gives it 3 stars out of 5. And Cinema Void says, Linklater packed this one with more white suburban teenage angst than the entire Limp Bizkit catalog. Yeah, It definitely feels that way, and it's about as effective. This next review is from Joe. Joe gives it 4 stars out of 5 with a heart. Joe liked this, and Joe says, unbelievably dark and grim by Linklater standards, but unlike my impression of a lot of the people who watch this, I think the contrast between this Texas slacker and Eric Bogosian's hyperverbal cynic gives the whole thing a unique energy. It's chilling somehow to imagine that these people could all be characters in a cheerful comedy with just a few changes in emphasis. I wish this had text epilogues from all the characters like American Graffiti. I'm glad he likes it. I really don't agree, to be absolutely honest. I mean, Linklater does dark okay in this film, but I just don't feel the unique energy that I think Joe feels in this film. And finally, this last review is from Francis Haha. Francis doesn't give this a rating at all. And Francis says, God, this was fucking depressing and all the characters are insufferable except BB. And BB's not insufferable because you barely know anything about her. That's the sad part. Yeah, the characters are pretty annoying overall. So in review, I think there's some good performances by the cast, and I also think the feel of suburban youths finding stuff to do at night is well captured. But honestly, this movie feels like it has a bit of identity crisis. The characters are all kind of boring and annoying. The film desperately needed to be cut in certain ways for themes, for characters, and for runtime, and I found the ending to be not effective at all. Overall, I'm going to give Richard Linklater's Suburbia 2 stars out of 5. This is pretty disappointing, and I'm a big fan of Linklater and his films, but this film just seemed to go on for way too long and didn't have a direction for it to go to. There are certain parts of it I like, but I really think that even if you just pared it down to what I liked, it would be at most a 3-star film. But even if you did all that, the characters needed a little more work. Probably one of my most disappointing watches from Linklater, but I know there are others I have not seen that are also probably worse. So overall, 2 stars out of 5 for me for Suburbia. Now let's recap the films I've reviewed in this week's videos. I gave 2 stars out of 5 for Easy A. I think that this is another case of the cast outperforming the material. And even though there are some laughs to be had, I felt the third act felt way too harsh for such a light comedy. I gave 3.5 stars out of 5 for me for Heathers. I found it to be a surprisingly dark and funny satire. I think Christian Slater and Winona Ryder have great chemistry together, but I wish they didn't make the message so damn obvious. I gave 2 stars out of 5 for Richard Linklater's Suburbia. I felt it had a good cast and it represented suburban youth hangouts at the time very well, but it desperately needed some cutting in multiple instances. And my film of the week is easily Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which I gave 4.5 stars out of 5 with a heart. It has a very well done mix of humor, warmth, and sadness. Olivia Cooke is excellent in this film, and it's got a bittersweet and very heartbreaking ending. So I overall definitely recommend you guys watch Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, and I would also say Heathers is also a good watch, so check those out if you're interested. And that is it for this episode of Watch Ready Heart. But before I go, I'm going to discuss next week's episodes. Next week is a bit of a tradition I have every year on this channel. And what I do is every June I take 1 week and I review LGBTQ films for Pride Month. So I'm going to start by reviewing the 1961 crime thriller Victim, queer coming-of-age film A Beautiful Thing, Lilies, and the Wachowskis films before they did The Matrix, Bound. So check those out next week. If you like any of the reviewers I've highlighted in this episode, you can check the video description for a link to their Letterboxd profile. Be sure to give them a follow and let them know that Brad from Watch Rate Heart sent you. You can follow me on Letterboxd and X at Watch Rate Heart. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. I'm Brad from Watch Rate Heart. Thank you for watching, and remember, we all watch and rate movies, but you give them the heart that makes them live forever.